It's become a bit of a cliche to say 2020 has been a really hard year, and for obviously good reason. I can't really think of any other time in modern history that has had this kind of worldwide event affect just about everyone. Of course, not everyone was affected equally, and while similar, not everyone's experiences have necessarily been the same. All things considered, I consider myself to be one of the lucky ones. The pandemic did not affect my schooling, as I was already doing school online. It didn't affect my employment at all. My job transitioned to a safe work-from-home environment back in spring. Yet the mental and emotional stress that I have gone through this year has been worse than any other I had previously experienced. My creative drive had diminished somewhat, and I found that whenever I had free time, I rarely had the energy to do the usual creative projects I'd work on. Often instead, a lot of that time was spent watching anime. One such anime was Re:Zero. Re:Zero aired its first season back in spring 2016, and at first glance it seemed to be the kind of anime I wouldn't really be able to get into. It seemed to share a lot of tropes with other anime I wasn't particularly fond of. I don't remember the exact details behind why I started watching it. I think I might have been confusing it with a different anime that someone was recommending me at the time. But once I did start watching, it didn't take long for me to fall absolutely in love with it. I'm going to assume most watching this will be familiar with the show, and I'm going to be discussing spoilers from the 2 seasons. But just to sum up the basic premise, Re:Zero is about a modern-day teenager named Subaru, who gets mysteriously transported into a fantasy world. In addition to that, there is a magical force that makes it so that every time he dies, he is sent back to a specific point in time. So not only is it an isekai, it is also a time loop story. Unfortunately, Subaru is also cursed to never speak of this power that he has, so he never gets a chance to really explain his predicament even when he desperately wants to. While Re:Zero has an interesting world as its setting, the main draw for me was its characters and compelling writing. When Season 1 ended, I was very anxious for Season 2 to happen. Little did I know, we would have to wait an additional 4 years for that to happen. Seems to be a bit of a common trend for some reason. While the 4-year wait wasn't preferable, Re:Zero Season 2 actually came in the exact time that I really needed it to. The moment Season 2 Episode 1 aired, I decided to binge through all of Season 1 again because it had been so long since I last saw it. And having watched Season 1 and the first half of Season 2 that is currently available, this really was the perfect show for me to watch in the year 2020. Despite the high fantasy nature of the show, the mental and emotional struggles that Subaru deals with are all too real. If there's one feeling that time loop narratives excel at portraying, it is the feeling of being stuck and unable to progress. And it's not very difficult to see why that would be a very relatable feeling in the year 2020. Speaking as someone who has been working from home and doing school from home, this effect is really enhanced. Being cooped up in the house all the time can be very draining. It's easy to lose track of what day it is, as each day feels indistinguishable from the rest. And not only were the days feeling boring, they make it easy to feel trapped, and that there is no escape, especially as the cases of the virus keep rising and fluctuating rapidly. It very much felt, and at the time of this recording, still feels like living in a time loop. However, Re:Zero handles time loops a little bit differently than most time loop stories. Films such as Groundhog Day have the protagonist loop back to one specific point in time, and that point is fixed for the duration of the film until the character breaks out. However, that kind of concept for a whole series would get old quick. Instead, Re:Zero is a little looser with that concept, and has the time destination update according to the progress that Subaru makes. So, the time period that Subaru will get sent back to in Episode 2 will not be the same time period that Subaru gets sent back to in Episode 16. However, in many ways, I find that this aspect of the show more accurately depicts how the feeling of being trapped and making little progress in life isn't a singular moment, but a reoccurring one. 2020 is definitely the time when feeling trapped and isolated is a fairly universal experience, but This is a feeling that has come and gone to me throughout many years of my life. I wouldn't say my experiences are particularly unique, as they are the struggles most people go through when they go from being a teenager into the early stages of adulthood. There is so much pressure to live a certain lifestyle and accomplish certain things when you reach certain ages. And I think this applies regardless of whether or not you had family members with clear expectations of you. These are expectations built into our minds since childhood. You turn 4 years old, you enter kindergarten. You turn 14 years old, you enter high school. You're 18, well, you graduated high school. And the exact ages may differ, but generally there has been a set schedule of these are the things that you are expected to accomplish throughout your life and when you're expected to accomplish them. And once you enter adulthood, the paths ahead may feel simultaneously expansive, but also very narrow. There is no clear path to take that will work for everyone. You were always told, choose the life you want to live. Yet those same life expectations built since childhood continue to be imposed upon you, whether imposed by others or yourself. The expectations of going to college and getting a degree, getting a secure job, moving out, getting married, having a family are all standard expectations, and if your environment growing up was anything like mine, then these things were generally expected to be accomplished by the time you turn 25. For context, I am currently 26. So you live life feeling like you're on a race against a clock, and then you stress yourself out if you aren't making progress fast enough. And that stress only further prevents you from accomplishing these goals that you set for yourself. It's easy to feel trapped. At any point that we make incremental progress, it can feel that we have finally let ourselves out of that trap, only to then seemingly fall back into the same time loop, and that feeling that whatever progress we made was reset, or at the very least diminished. The time looping nature of ReZero's narrative highlights this pattern really well. Feeling trapped, making incremental progress, and then going right back into feeling trapped again, sometimes feeling that we regressed rather than progressed. We like to imagine that progression is this nice linear graph with set events that are bound to happen to anyone, but the reality is that generally isn't how it works. Whether it's by our own shortcomings or outside forces we can't control, progression in our life goals is chaotic and inconsistent. Subaru enters this fantasy world immediately creating specific expectations and goals in mind, and for as much progress as he sometimes makes, he often falls short and has to start over. Most of these goals are social in nature, which makes it all the more tragic when he dies and is forced to start over. While most time loop stories focus on the monotony of living the same time period over and over and over again, they rarely focus this deeply on this specific aspect of that concept. The horror of trying to build relationships with people and having those relationships get reset. This is what made me realize that ReZero was truly special. It was smart enough to know that the real horror of being trapped in a time loop lies in being unable to make lasting connections. When Subaru arrives in this fantasy world, he's rescued by a female half-elf, who refers to herself as Satella. He falls in love with her and tries building a connection, only for that to be completely reset when he is murdered later on. Meeting her again in this new life, it is revealed that this half-elf does not share the memories Subaru has of them together. When Subaru calls her Satella, she responds with great offense. And while he's able to make a better impression after dying and resetting again, and he even manages to get her real name, Amelia, it is still very clear that the connection Subaru and this girl have can never truly be what it was the first time. There will always be some kind of disconnect there. Over time, Subaru's obsession over Amelia and wanting to romantically pursue her grows stronger, but his relationship goals are constantly held back due to the constant time looping that occurs. In one life, he'll convince her to go on a date with him the next day. Then, next thing he knows, he resets back into a time before that conversation ever took place. Yet, mentally for Subaru, he still has a date set with Amelia, but it's not a date that this version of Amelia ever agreed to. And it's hard for him to adapt to that disconnect. It'd be hard for any human. And this of course extends beyond Subaru and Amelia's relationship, but really his relationship with everyone. For as many times as Subaru keeps dying and resetting time, he is effectively regressing the relationships that he had built up, and the disconnect grows even further. Nowhere is this more clear than the ending to episode 13.
ねえスバル、どうしてスバルはそんなに私を助けてくれようとするの？
君が俺を助けてくれたからだ。
私がスバルを？
そうだよ。君が俺にしてくれたことがどれだけ俺の救いになってくれたかわからない。
わからないよ、スバル。
わからないのも仕方ない。でも本当だ、俺は君に救われた。だから俺がしていることは救われたことの恩返しで。わからないって言ってるの。
Realizing that they can't really understand each other, Amelia chooses to cut ties with Subaru, and quite justifiably from her perspective. While no one can blame the situation Subaru is stuck with, he made a lot of really selfish choices in this midpoint of the season and really showed the worst parts of himself. So at this point, Subaru has a choice. Either give up and wallow in self-pity, or move forward and improve in whatever way he can. At first, he tries to do the latter, but as is expected in the show, he is hit by brick wall after brick wall. On top of the emotional obstacles, he has to deal with the very physical obstacles caused by the witches' cult. Not only is he constantly met with the taste of death, but he is forced to witness the gruesome deaths and sufferings of those he cherishes, Amelia included, over and over and over again. Each time he thinks he's made some progress, life knocks him down again and resets him back to zero. And while in our own lives we, hopefully, won't be met with the same gruesome scenario Subaru finds himself in, it is difficult to keep getting back up, only to then be knocked down again. Speaking for myself, that is what most of my life has felt like. And each time I find myself knocked down, it is so tempting to concede and just give up on life. It is easy to come to the doomer mindset and assume the worst possible outcome is always inevitable, no matter how many times you try.
諦めるのは簡単です。でも、スバル君には似合わない。
These words by Rem give Subaru the strength to keep going, because he realizes he doesn't have to do this alone. While it takes a lot of effort on Subaru's part, he is able to build the confidence, charisma, and intelligence he needs to receive the assistance necessary to stop the monsters and villains of this arc. It takes Subaru several more deaths and resets. Not all of his problems are solved all at once. It still takes a lot of work. But he was able to accomplish his goals by refusing to give up and changing himself for the better. And by season 1's final episode, he is able to reconnect with Amelia and fix their broken relationship. While it took significantly longer than Subaru was hoping for, he's been able to move forward. As I look back on 2019 in particular, I remember that being a very dark time for me emotionally. I felt this incredible depression and this inescapable feeling that nothing was ever going to go well, which sort of peaked when I was sent to the hospital shortly after my 25th birthday. This was very much a moment where I felt trapped. There did not seem to be any real choices I could make that would result in a life I would want. I was ready to just let it go. In my mind, there was no way out. No possible way that I could be happy, that I could ever accomplish the things that I want to accomplish. It felt so hopeless. I wanted so badly to just give up on life. But it is easy to give up. And it doesn't suit any of us. I was looking forward to 2020 with optimism and a determination to get things done. For the majority of Season 1, a lot of Subaru's obstacles are solved as he overcomes his personal shortcomings, becomes a better person, and gains needed support. But what becomes more tragic is when he seems to be doing everything in his power to do right, only for the world to go totally against him and remove his closest sources of support. This is where Season 2 comes in, and boy is it fitting that it released in summer 2020. I thought Subaru had it rough in Season 1, but boy was that nothing compared to what he goes through in Season 2. His strongest emotional support, Rem, is out of commission, as well as out of everyone's memory, and he later finds himself and many of his friends in a place called Sanctuary, being held captive until someone can pass these trials of the Witch of Greed. These trials cause a lot of mental suffering, and only Amelia and Subaru are able to go through and attempt it. Subaru finds himself at odds with the locals, in particular a human-beast hybrid named Garfield, who spends a good number of time loops trying to kill him. In the meantime, assassins have been hired to assault the Roswell mansion where the unconscious Rem is being held. It would be one thing if Subaru could leave the sanctuary and focus on saving those at the mansion, but if Subaru doesn't stay in the sanctuary, then he risks an army of killer rabbits wreaking havoc and slaughtering everyone. On top of all that, this was all orchestrated by a man close to him who is scarily aware of Subaru's powers and is trying to force him to choose between either saving the people at the sanctuary or the people at the mansion. It's a lot to take in, and this is a task that seems absolutely impossible. As of the time of this recording, only the first half of Season 2 has been released, but we've had a full 13 episodes, and even still, Subaru has not come close to solving this predicament. For comparison's sake, by the time that we reached episode 13 of Season 1, Subaru managed to get through 2 entire arcs and was beginning the 3rd arc. Those arcs feel like child's play compared to everything Subaru has to juggle through here. I had a conversation with a friend not too long ago where he said he wasn't too fond of this season because he felt that it was taking too long for Subaru to really get anywhere, and that this arc was dragging its feet. And while I can understand where he was coming from, all I had to reply with was, that's the point. ReZero has always been about trying to overcome struggle after struggle with seemingly no end in sight, and Season 2 simply elevates that to new heights. And honestly, I found it to be very fitting given that in the real world, as this season was being aired, everyone around the world, in some way, was feeling trapped and held back. This year has dragged on for a lot of us, and many life goals that we once held and wished to accomplish this year were forced to be pushed back. I mentioned earlier how I looked forward to 2020 with optimism after ending 2019 on a more hopeful note, and boy was that emotional whiplash really hard. I looked to 2020 thinking that things would get better, and instead things took a drastic turn for the worse. While I thankfully still maintained my employment, I still had to cut myself off from social events and activities that involved physical gatherings. And as I'm sure everyone is painfully aware of now, limiting our interactions with other humans is painful. Whether you're introverted or extroverted, it is really, really painful. While the internet helps alleviate this problem, there is still something missing when we don't get to interact face to face. And yet, it's what we have to do. It's the right thing to do. Exercising caution like this is what is necessary in order to mitigate the spread of this virus. And so, finding myself in this mental state, I related to Subaru's struggles even more. It felt like I was truly at a dead end, trying everything within my power to do what's right, but still being stuck. And what little support may have been there is now seemingly diminished. That's already bad enough. But what's worse is when being presented with the appearance of support, only for it to be disingenuous, even malicious. In ReZero, this comes in the form of Roswell Mathers and the Witch of Greed, Echidna. Echidna appears to Subaru throughout the season and helps him on his journey. She is who grants Subaru the ability to go through the trials in the first place, and she is willing to share her knowledge in order to help Subaru achieve his goals. While Subaru is rightfully cautious around her, he can't deny how useful her help has been. And in one of the most cathartic moments of the show, it is revealed that Echidna knows Subaru can travel back in time upon his own death, and is aware of all the times he has done so. After all the torment, all the stress, all the loneliness that came from being unable to tell anyone what he has gone through, he now has found someone who understands and is fully aware of his situation. This moment was incredibly bittersweet, but in hindsight feels all the more harsh when Echidna's deeper intentions are revealed. While Echidna may understand what Subaru has gone through and is fond of him in her own way, she doesn't really care about Subaru, not really anyway. She's mainly interested in what she can do to use him, and thinks that this is justifiable because she is perfectly content to be used by him in return. And Roswaal, revealed to be the one orchestrating all the obstacles that Subaru comes across this season, only wishes to mold Subaru into something he's not, and force him to choose what he is willing to protect and what he is willing to sacrifice. These two characters sting particularly harsh because they are the only ones who really understand Subaru's pain, something that Subaru has wanted for so long. Yet, instead of this helping him feel less isolated, these two only continue to make Subaru feel more alone than ever before. How can Subaru trust anyone at this point? His major source of support was gone. The only two people who know his powers and struggles only wish to manipulate him. He finds difficulty creating trust with any of the locals of the sanctuary, and any minor slip-up he makes results in someone wanting to arrest or kill him. It's no wonder that Subaru tries to tackle on as much as he can here alone, because he truly feels that he does not have anyone else. That was exactly how I felt in summer 2020. It's hard enough when you feel isolated because you're trying to social distance from others and do your part to slow the spread of a new and dangerous virus. It's even more hard when a worldwide event like this starts to reveal people for who they really are. There's a lot of people in my life, and I'm talking family members, teachers, former coworkers, friends, close friends even, who revealed to me through their actions that they prioritize personal convenience over the health and well-being of other people. When I was diagnosed with diabetes in 2019, I knew that my immune system was going to be weakened as a result. And when that event happened, I actually didn't tell very many people at first. Mainly because I had this childish complex about not wanting people to see me any differently than they did before or something like that. So only a few of my friends even knew that I had it shortly after it happened. This video is actually the most public I've ever been about this. As it relates to the pandemic, this puts me in the high-risk category. Thankfully I haven't gotten it, but heaven forbid if I were to get it, chances are I would not be someone with mild symptoms. Given my luck, they'd likely be very severe, and who knows if I'd be able to survive. So while this virus is a threat to everyone, it is very clearly a threat to someone like me especially. So with that context in mind, when I had friends who I was close enough with, and trusted enough to tell them about my diagnosis shortly after it happened, and then in 2020 one of them clearly communicates to me that they think their convenience to not wear a piece of cloth over their face is more important than slowing the spread of a deadly virus, one that could very well kill me if I get it, it hurts. Especially because this behavior did not match the kind of person I always thought they were. Worse yet, they were trying to make me feel guilty for telling people that they should take the pandemic seriously and care about other people. Something as simple as wearing a cloth over your face was too inconvenient for someone who, for a long time, I saw as a good and caring person who would understand the importance of doing your part to prevent others from getting sick. It felt like a betrayal. And it was more than just one friend that did this to me. There were a lot of people who either cut ties with me or who I had to cut ties with them. But it always hurt the most when it happened with the few individuals who specifically knew I was at risk, who knew very clearly that this virus was a very real danger to me, and still chose to undermine the severity of the pandemic, suggesting that their convenience is more important than my well-being. And that's a hard thing to experience when you already suffer from long periods of depression on a regular basis, even without a pandemic. It's true when people say that isolating yourself from others increases depression. But you know what makes that depression even worse? Being someone at risk and having people who you once trusted to do the right thing, who you once trusted to actually care about you, instead actively contribute to the problems that have allowed the virus to spread as wildly as it has, while suggesting that it's not worth it to do something as simple as wearing a face covering and keeping physical distance. You want to talk about depression? That's when depression gets really bad. Because now it's not just that you're physically alone, you feel totally betrayed and abandoned. You're mentally and socially alone. So anyway, to tie it back to ReZero, needless to say, Subaru's struggles felt eerily similar. Something that isn't often said about ReZero is that the vast majority of relationships Subaru has built up have had to be earned, often through very harsh and gruesome ways. Even Rem, while it's easy to see her as the biggest support Subaru has also been someone who brutally murdered him out of pure suspicion, twice. And while the Rem that did those things is technically not the same as the Rem that Subaru knows now, those memories are still there. Those things still happened to Subaru. That kind of mental strain likely gives Subaru the impression that authentic relationships can't really happen, that you have to offer some kind of visible benefit or reward, or else you can't be expected to receive any help. You're only worth having around as a friend, so long as they have something they can directly benefit from you. But despite all that had happened, and despite Subaru feeling he really had no one he could turn to, this moment in Season 2, Episode 7 shows that this line of thinking wasn't entirely accurate. Subaru finds himself imprisoned and truly alone, only to then be unexpectedly rescued by Otto. Subaru is relieved, but perplexed. Why would Otto risk his own well-being to rescue Subaru? What's in it for him? What's his motive? How does he benefit? The answer?
ですね、夏希さん。友人を助けようとするってのは、そんなにおかしなことですかね。
Subaru can barely register this. Just because we're friends? The idea of doing something and risking everything just out of friendship never really occurred to him. Surely there's something else, right? Some kind of ulterior motive? Nothing? Well, less than nothing, because as it turns out, Otto has every reason not to support Subaru. It was revealed that he was actually being bribed by Garfield earlier not to do anything. So not only is Otto choosing not to benefit, he is actively risking harm to himself in order to save Subaru. A similar moment is echoed a few episodes later at actually the last episode of Season 2, Part 1. While Subaru continues to feel like he has to isolate himself and do everything alone, Otto gives him a good wake-up call and tells him to stop shouldering all of his problems on his own. If Season 1 was primarily about patiently trying again and again while actively working on improving oneself, Season 2 was about learning to love yourself and recognize the very real friends that you can rely on, with the warning to cautiously avoid those who really don't care about you. This last year has been really difficult for me, and it has changed how I see so many people who I once highly respected. And while I'm certainly an advocate for the concept of forgiveness, I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what any of them have done. But I'm glad that ReZero Season 2 came when it did, because as silly as it sounds, it helped me to process these emotions, and it has helped me recognize that while my negativity bias is only letting me see people who have let me down, there are many people who haven't. And I know that there are people who truly do care, and who are doing their part in making sure that everyone is able to get through these difficult times as safely as possible. There are still people I can lean on, and it's never a good idea for me to shoulder all my burdens myself, even if they are just emotional burdens. It's not good for any human to do that. I've no doubt that Otto will play a significant role in helping Subaru find a solution that will save both the people at the sanctuary and the people at the mansion. The second half of Season 2 begins within the first month of the new year. And much like how the first half of Season 2 felt right at home in the 2020 climate, I start both the second half of Season 2 and the start of 2021 with a faint hope that things will turn out alright. There's still going to be a lot of obstacles, a lot of hitting brick walls and moments of feeling stuck, but I just gotta keep getting back up again. And over time, things will be okay. And that is why Re:Zero is the anime that I needed in 2020.